Welcome to this first joint venture with Transport Topics and CQ Roll Call. I'm Dan Ronan, the Associate News Editor at Transport Topics. We're pleased to welcome our first guest, the Honorable Elaine Chao. She is the 18th Secretary of the U.S. Department of Transportation. In her distinguished career in government, the Secretary has had extensive experience in the transportation realm, serving as both the Commissioner and Chair of the Federal Maritime Commission and Deputy Secretary of Transportation in the George H.W. Bush administration. She has also served as the Director of the Peace Corps and head of the United Way of America. And during President George W. Bush's administration, Secretary Chao served 8 years as the Secretary of Labor, making her the longest serving Labor Secretary since Frances Perkin, who was the Secretary during the Franklin Roosevelt administration. With the election of President Donald Trump in 2016, Secretary Chao again found herself in public service and back at the DOT, being chosen to head the Department of Transportation, where she has been the Secretary now for nearly 4 years. Secretary Chao, welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
We're in an election year with just weeks to go before we begin voting. Congress and the White House, as you know, are in full election mode. Congress and the White House are also taking steps to extend the FAST Act for another year. Is an extension the best way to go right now, given the calendar with about a month or so before we get to the voting?
Well, as you mentioned, the FAST Act, which was for 5 years, is expiring on September 30th. We've actually been providing technical assistance to the Congress as it put together, a draft extension of the surface highway bill. Congress has now introduced a 1-year extension, as you mentioned, and that will take it over to like September 30th, 2021. And this measure would appropriate about $13.6 billion from the general fund into the Highway Trust Fund, which needs the money, and then about $10.4 billion into the highway account, $3.2 billion into mass transit. And the president has always said, that any infrastructure bill needs to be bipartisan. But I think it's better. 1 year is better than 3 months. But clearly, for the regulated community or the recipient community, they would love it if it were a longer term. We should be thinking strategically and long term to address the infrastructure needs of our country and increase, our economic competitiveness and productivity. So we stand ready to work with Congress on a long-term measure to address the nation's infrastructure needs, because certainty for the states as they plan for their transportation futures is very important.
Yeah, as you were saying, Secretary, the local DOTs and the road commissioners, the road builders, they like to know how much money is coming, how much money they can spend, when it can be spent.
Absolutely, because they've got a long-term plan, because a road or a bridge doesn't take a year to finish being built. It's a multi-year process for the roads now. I think on average it's 16 years. So to have a certainty of funding, to have a certainty of timeline, that all helps the states to plan longer term, and in so doing, provide better services basically to their constituencies within their own state.
The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, which you oversee, has an interim administrator in the person of Mr. Wiley Deck, who's running the agency now. He's the second person to lead FMCSA since Ray Martinez left more than a year ago to go up to New England. If there is a second Trump administration, if the president is reelected, what type of person would you recommend to be tasked to lead this important agency?
Hey, can I just also just point out one thing?
Please.
We had Jim Mullen, and then we had Wiley Deck, and we had Ray Martinez. They were all excellent public servants. Ordinarily, under ordinary times, if the Senate were more collegial, these would be permanent leaders of FMCSA. Unfortunately, the confirmation process is now so fractured and so partisan that it's almost impossible. This administration has well over 285 nominees still outstanding. We have ambassadors who have been nominated in 2017 who never got a chance to serve our country and to go overseas because they were never confirmed. So that's a real problem. But as you mentioned, in August, we announced Wiley Deck as the deputy administrator at FMCSA because that was all we could do. We could not bring him to nomination because, again, the nominations confirmation process is so broken at this point. And Wally brings to the role a deep understanding of the trucking industry. I mean, you all know that he previously served as senior policy advisor in the office of the secretary, and he was down in FMCSA before that as director of government affairs. You know, at its core, the primary mission of FMCSA is safety, just as it is across all the department. So FMCSA has been laser focused on improving safety on our roadways, but also reducing unnecessary, burdensome, duplicative, outdated regulations that do not promote safety. And so we're very proud of the fact that we have done a great deal to make regulations more commonsensical. And these last few months have been a challenging time, as we all know, for the trucking industry. So FMCSA and the entire department have worked to be good partners for America's truckers. And in the months ahead, we'll continue to listen and work with stakeholders as we emerge from COVID-19. And then, as we all know, in the second term, we all work at the pleasure of the president.
So, but it sounds like, though, from your description of your relationship with Mr. Deck, that if the president would be reelected, he would be someone who could be tasked to lead this agency.
You know, I would never overstep my bounds. That is the president's decision. A presidential appointment, Senate confirmed, means just that. It's the president's choice. But Wiley has certainly done a great job, and he certainly has my trust, as does the senior leadership of the Department of Transportation.
What are your own plans, Madam Secretary, if the president were to win re-election November 3rd? Would you like to continue serving as DOT Secretary? You have a long history of being in 2 terms in an administration, dating back to the Bush administration. Would that be something you'd like to do?
Well, I think that's putting the cart before the horse. That's the expression. You know, I think we're all very much focused on what we're doing to improve the lives of truckers every single day. We're very much focused on doing the work of the American people. And I know that the campaign and the president's campaign is focused on winning the election, and then it's going to be up to the voters as to what's going to happen. And then after that, it's up to the president. We all serve, again, at the pleasure of the president. We would never presume to second guess or to get ahead of him in terms of what he wants to do.
What do you think, Madam Secretary, has been your own accomplishment in the agencies, the department's biggest accomplishment over the last 3.5 years, almost 4 years now? What do you think?
I think we have tried to lead this department in very commonsensical ways. We understand that Americans are hardworking people and that they want to be able to take care of their families, conduct their lives as they see it, and they don't want the government to hinder them or hamper their efforts. They want the government to facilitate. And at the Department of Transportation, our efforts are guided by 3 priorities. And people have heard me say this repeatedly. Number 1 priority is safety. We want your truckers to be able to get home safely to their loved ones and their families at night. Secondly, the president is very clear about wanting to rebuild and refurbish our country's critical infrastructure. And third, we've got to be preparing for the future by engaging with emerging technologies to address legitimate public concerns about safety, security, and privacy, but without hampering innovation. And I'm really proud of the work that we've done in all 3 of these areas. On safety and regulatory reform, the department has been a leader in eliminating unnecessary regulations that inhibit economic growth and innovation while continuing to advance safety. Because when the government is too prescriptive and the rules and regulations are too confusing, that actually hampers safety. So on the regulatory front, as examples, we have reformed the hours of service rules. We have instituted what's called rules on rules to make rules more consistent. We have done a whole host of other things on the regulatory front for the trucking industry. I mean, you know, we still remember not only hours of service, but so many, going into New York City, the truckers were facing a 14-day quarantine period, but that made no sense. So we negotiated on their behalf with the city and state of New York to enable truckers to be able to come in and out of New York, deliver the essential materials and supplies that New Yorkers want, but then be able to get on and with the rest of their business. We also worked with state and local governments as well. I mean, for a while, I was really concerned that truckers had no food. At these highway rest stations. I mean, for a while there, they were even closed, so that truckers had to pull off to the side of the road, which is very unsafe. So we again worked with state departments of transportation to open up the rest areas. And then secondly, we actually waived a regulation that disallowed food trucks from being able to be at these rest stops, but the restaurants are closed. So we allowed private food trucks to go to these rest areas and supply hopefully delicious food, nourishing food for the truckers. So a lot of just common sense things like that. And also a lot of truckers were concerned about renewing their licenses, which had expired, but the state departments of transportation were closed. So we gave temporary waivers. Or another one was they had to fulfill their training requirements, but the state departments were closed. So we gave them temporary exemptions and waivers for that as well. So I think we think the role of government is to help people get on with their lives, to make a living, so they can spend more time with their loved ones. And so I hope we've done that. That's a long answer, but I'm, as you can see, really passionate. The third one, obviously, is innovation. And we want, again, we're not promoting innovation, but it's going to come. So what are we doing to engage with these new technologies to make sure that they're safe, that they're secure? Because any one of these systems, if they were hijacked or hacked into, can be security risks. And then, of course, privacy issues. You don't want all this, all data, to be embedded in these softwares that will give information that truckers perhaps and other people don't want to give out. So, for example, we've done a lot with, innovation in terms of facilitating other kinds of innovation. For example, Net Council. The Net Council is something that enables different innovations, different technologies encompassing different modes that will be able to address an easier access point for the department. And then, of course, we've been working with commercial space, launch and re-entry, with drones. So we're just keeping up with what's happening. We don't want to hamper innovation, because if we do, and if we hold back all this technology, it will actually hurt us as a country in terms of our ability to compete overseas, because other nations are embarking upon all these new transportation technologies. And we want to make sure that we still remain the innovative leaders of the world, where we are improving the quality of life for people around the globe.
Secretary Chao, since February and the onset of the pandemic, there's been a lot of discussion about how the truck drivers, the men and women who are out there on the roads, have really gotten a huge public relations boost in terms of now they're looked upon in many communities as firefighters, doctors, and others who are those first responders that we hear so much about. Would you agree with that? And what do you say to those men and women who have been out there, the heroes doing the hard work, the daily slog that needs to be done?
I think we're going through a very difficult time in our country's history. I've always had tremendous respect for first responders. I think they are so essential to saving our lives. And I wish that we can thank them more, not less. So under this administration, in this department, we partner with first responders, and we want to make sure that their jobs are made easier, not harder, by our actions.
What are going to be some of the top goals in the second Trump administration for transportation? Should Mr. Trump be reelected in November? What would be some of the things you'd like to see pushed forward?
Well, I think we will continue to focus on infrastructure. The administration submitted a bill last February 12, 2018, and unfortunately, it was not accepted on a bipartisan basis. The president has always said that infrastructure should be done on a bipartisan basis because there's no politics in infrastructure. You know, your truckers are going over roads that have huge, gullies in them. That's not good for their trucks. That's not good for the efficient delivery of services. I mean, of goods and of services. So we need to have good infrastructure. It's part of our competitiveness as well. It adds to our productivity increases, and it also contributes to the quality of life. So in the meantime, while we have not been able to have an infrastructure bill, the department has distributed well over $200 billion plus, to enhance, repair, and rebuild America's infrastructure. So I suspect that this will continue to be a huge topic for the next Trump administration, for the next term of the Trump administration. And secondly, in the previous 8 years prior to this administration, urban America got most of the federal resources. Rural America was terribly neglected and overlooked. I come from rural America. I come from the proud state of Kentucky. And I know that rural America is not looking for a handout. They are just looking for equitable distribution of federal resources. So I think that we will continue to pay appropriate attention to rural areas, because even though smaller population lives in rural America experiences higher than their proportionate level of accidents and fatalities. And while urban dwellers may think, what do rural roads have to do with me? Any one day, 44% of urban dwellers travel on rural roads. So the state of rural roads and bridges in particular are important, not only to rural America, but to all Americans. And so to that end, I've launched something called the Routes Initiative. It's a historic investment in opportunity zones and in rural America. We're not being prejudicial, not quite the contrary. What happens is rural America doesn't have the money, to hire the armies of people that urban America has to compete for grant dollars. And so what we have initiated with the Routes Initiative is to pay attention to the questions and needs of rural America, and to basically give them kind of a toolkit to allow them to map for themselves where they can find the government resources they need to invest in themselves. It's a black box, because when you deal with the government, you can understand that, we're huge, we're bureaucratic, we're siloed. It's hard to find resources and the right place to go in a federal government bureaucracy. So the Routes Initiative, basically, it's on our website, www.dot.gov. There's a little link to Routes Initiative, and counties, municipalities, state and local governments can click on to that link, and again, find the toolkit that will tell them, where they can find the pots of money for their particular projects.
Secretary, we've only got a couple minutes left, and I want to get a couple of questions in before we conclude our discussion. The agency, FMCSA, recently announced a new pilot program to build in some flexibility for the hours of service rule. And as you know, that's a very controversial, and it's been discussed for many, many years. What are going to be the goals for the DOT in this program? How would you measure this as being successful when we get to that point?
Well, first of all, we're going to listen. Okay, that seems like so unusual. We're going to listen to the public and also to the stakeholder community. I think we owe them that. We are public servants. We are not the wisdom. We are not the fountain of all wisdom. Quite the contrary. We need to be seeking comments. And so on August 28th, the department announced that we're looking for public comment on a pilot program to allow additional regulatory relief on the hours of service. And we're thinking about allowing participating drivers to pause their on-duty driving period with one off-duty period up to 3 hours. So this pilot program, it's scheduled to operate for 3 years or less, will gather evidence to analyze the safety and the feasibility of such a modification to the hours of service rules. And again, we want to hear directly from drivers about, what they think about this idea, what they think about the safety aspects of this, and what their ideas are as well. So please encourage your audience, drivers, motor carriers, and those who are interested to provide comment. Again, this pilot program is just another step that the department is taking to explore ways to improve safety on our roadways while increasing flexibility for truckers who do so much to keep our supply chains open and to keep our economy strong.
As I said at the outset, Madam Secretary, you served in previous Republican administrations. As one who was the Labor Secretary for 8 years, how would you describe this 4 years in government as compared to your 8 years as the Labor Secretary?
Well, generally speaking, we who are on the Republican side, and I'm not being partisan, it's just stating facts. We are right of center, and then the other party is left of center. And generally speaking, we tend to be, we tend to trust the individual more, and we trust the private sector more. And we don't think that, again, we know all the answers. And I would hope that we listen more, and that we are more willing to provide regulatory reform that allows greater flexibility to the individual drivers. Because again, we believe that they know best, how to conduct their own lives, do their own business, and they would know how best to schedule their own days. So these are some of the things of which we are exploring. We want safety, obviously, to be the #1 concern, but is there a better way to achieve this? How do we, and I think there are people, many of us, who believe that we can actually make safety better, enhance safety, if we had better regulations that were more commonsensical, and that were not so complicated, so confusing. And so many times, so much of the regulations are at odds with one another. So when federal regulations and state and local regulations are duplicative, outdated, overly burdensome, confusing, and conflicting, they actually work against safety on the roads.
Secretary Chao, it's been a pleasure to chat with you for the last 20 or 25 minutes here on what has been the first inaugural edition of a joint venture between Transport Topics and CQ Roll Call. Thank you very much for taking time out of your busy day to chat with us.
Thanks for having me. I'm so glad I'm able to kick this off for you.
Thank you. We want to thank Department of Transportation Secretary Elaine Chao for today's keynote interview. Please continue to tune in during the remainder of today's inaugural virtual summit, brought to you by Transport Topics and CQ Roll Call. Don't miss the rest of today's program, which we're excited to bring to you. We'll have insightful interviews from leaders in transportation, from Capitol Hill to some of the country's largest freight carriers. I'm Dan Ronan. Thanks again for watching.